Welcome to the Education Investment Podcast. In a world where investors are looking for stable and growing long-term returns with social impact, the education sector is becoming increasingly attractive. We speak to leading educators, operators, and investors in the education sector around the world to explore this growing investment theme alongside our listeners. From preschools to K-12 schools to higher education and vocational education. From edtech to education infrastructure. From VC investors to private equity and family offices, we explore it all. I'm your host, Monde Nkosi. Education has always been a big part of my life because my mother founded a school which was across the road from our home. I have benefited from excellent schools and teachers in South Africa and the US. I went on to study education and am now very grateful to be an investor in this sector that I love.
All opinions expressed by podcast guests are solely their own opinions. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Today, I am privileged to host Rosan Bosch for a conversation on designing learning spaces. We'll start off by understanding how the design of learning spaces impacts students and teachers. Then we'll dive deep into Rosan's design philosophy and approach, using some of the schools and universities she has worked on as examples. We'll conclude by discussing what Rosan is excited about in the future of learning space innovation. Rosan is a globally renowned expert on the design of learning spaces. She is the founder and creative director of Rosan Bosch Studio, where she has designed schools, universities, and other learning spaces for, among others, the Vitra schools in Sweden, the award-winning Sheikh Zayed Private Academy in Abu Dhabi, Liberty University in Mexico, and the Ministry of Education in Argentina. Rosan has authored multiple books, including Play to Learn, Designing for Uncertainty, as well as Designing for a Better World Starts at School. Her work has been featured on CNN, Fast Company, TED, and a range of education and architecture industry publications. Rosan holds qualifications from the Amsterdam University of the Arts and the University of Barcelona. She was also recently awarded an honorary doctorate by Hasselt University in recognition of her pioneering work in transforming educational spaces. Rosan, it's wonderful to have you on. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. Happy to have you. So as we kick off, we'd first love to learn about you, a bit about your journey, your upbringing. Tell us a bit about your family and ultimately what drew you to design and education.
Well, the short story is that my family, my mother, she was a photographer, an artist. Like she has an artistical background, and my father, he was in leadership, and he changed jobs every 5 years, so he was a rather restless person. He actually wrote a book on education in the 70s when I was young on how real life situations should drive more and be more important in education. So in a way, he made some foundations of my work today. So basically, I have a background in contemporary art. That's what I studied. And I started to do what I do today, combining in a way design, architecture and art in the way we work with schools because of my own children. When they started in school, I just couldn't bear to see or live or experience, their kind of, them actually going through the same, maybe not necessarily positive experience of going to school as I had went through as a young girl. So I felt that I wanted to do something about it. I had to do something. So that's where it all started, with the school of my own kids, actually, basically.
Okay. So I'm going to come back to your kids because I'm really interested in that story and how then it's informed your career path. But I first want to go back to your own upbringing. So you mentioned your mother was a photographer and someone who was involved in the arts, and your dad in various leadership roles and wrote a book on education. Did you have any siblings? And also, what country did you grow up in, and how was your own school experience?
I don't know. I grew up in the Netherlands. I'm originally from Utrecht, actually. And but I've been traveling a lot. I think I was 19, almost 20 when I moved to Barcelona in Spain. Went back again as well to finish both my education in the Netherlands. But my background is from the Netherlands. But in a way, I moved away, went to Barcelona, just came back to finish my studies the last year. And then, I never actually looked back. And I haven't lived in the Netherlands since. I have a brother. He still lives in the Netherlands. My mother, who's also still alive, also lives in the Netherlands. So obviously I visit them sometimes, once in a while. But my family today is in Denmark. I live in Copenhagen. My husband is Danish. My children are a little bit of both. He also has a mixed background. I think this is a little bit the future. We have, so in a way we combine different nationalities in our families and in our children and so on and so forth. So that is the pragmatic part of the story. My school experience, I think I had was in two parts. Let me see. So it's not all bad. I had a good time when I was little. I went to a Montessori school. And in a way, I had I grow with it. I remember actually that I was allowed to leave the school to go to the local public library because I had read all books at school, and then they would give me almost like a driving license, like a license to walk alone from school to this library, and it made me like feel so important. I mean, I might have been 10 years old or something, or 11, and I was just crossing the street. I grew up in a small village close by the city of Utrecht. And so it was not a big thing, but it made me feel, very, important and actually made me read even more. But then when I was 12 years old in the Netherlands, you change from lower, primary school to secondary school. Then I had to enroll into a normal school. And this is where trouble started, So my experience at school was rather painful. It was extremely boring, and I couldn't understand why I had to sit endless hours boring my brains out, when I could do whatever they were trying to tell me in such just like a flinch of the time. And then I could spend my time so much more useful. For example, going to the pool with my friends, or, writing crazy. I was always writing books and building things and being creative. So I really couldn't see the purpose of why I was at school, especially because I really felt that, it was unnecessary a lot of the time. It was very inefficient and it was going too slow, basically. So,
Understood. Okay.
Painful experience of learning discipline with teachers. Oh, I remember an episode, which is a bit funny. Because then I think I just started on this normal high school. And when you go to a Montessori school, you don't have, you have a lot of autonomy in what you do when you work. So, you can do what you want, in a way. But that doesn't mean you don't do anything, but you decide yourself what you use your time on. So I had this teacher and he would ask me, okay, Miss Rosan or Miss Bosch, can you please, share with us the homework we have done? And I said, no. And he would ask me, and what did Miss Bosch do that she is not able to share her homework? What was more important than, to do this? And I would say something, I don't recall exactly, but I said something like, okay, I went to the pool, with my friends because I consider that more important. And that was, of course, not really accepted. So, so it was a troublesome transition from Montessori into more traditional education.
Now, that's lovely, Rosan. I think one of the themes that comes through so strongly as you're speaking is the freedom and autonomy of your primary school versus the rigidity and being put into a box, and some of the great talents which we see today from you, the creativity, etc. Almost being, high school trying to shut that out in a conventional high school. Okay, that's really helpful. So you were then painting a bit of a contrast. You were saying your own children, you didn't want them to have an experience where they put in a box. So I'd love to learn more about your children and what you didn't want them to experience in school.
Well, basically what happened is that I could see with my oldest son when he started at school that he started to, kind of create a connection into what you can call learning in school and education. And he started to connect it to something which is like you have to do it because it's like obligation. It's not because you actually voluntarily like to do so. And the obligation is like a bit like a sour duty. It's like doing the dishes kind of attitude. It's like because
eating your veggies.
Exactly. So it's like everybody tells me I have to do this, so I'm doing it, but I'm not doing it because I want to do it. And I found that so profoundly wrong, because learning and developing yourself and challenging yourself while doing so, taking on risks and wow, can I do this, and mastering things is actually, that's what drives us through life. It's also what gives us big satisfaction in life. It's what makes us grow as people. And I had these little boys that, they were just, they were always occupied making up stories like, oh, Mom, how far is the sun actually, and how do I calculate the distance to the sun? Or I'm going to make a newspaper and I'm going to write a newspaper for the whole neighborhood because there's no newspaper for children with teams that we are interested in. And so they had no frontier, and they were not afraid to take on impossible tasks. And I think that's a wonderful thing, just have this entrepreneurial, or just a passion for life, basically, and development. And then, you start trying to calculate. My son, when he wants to calculate the distance to the sun, he was like, I was 8 years old or something. So of course, then you what do? You don't say no. You try to help him a little bit to figure it out, and maybe he doesn't manage yet. Maybe he comes in a couple of years, But all this kind of lust, I call it lust for life and lust for learning. This is embedded, it's human. And this is actually what's wrong in education partially, is because it doesn't question how do we actually learn. It just sees it as a system that you have to oppose, kind of on top of on people. And it's wrong, because people want to learn, because that's what satisfies us in life. If we learn, we master something, we go through challenges, etc. So it was connecting a negative mindset to the actual fact of learning. And this is the worst what you can do, because you foster a fixed mindset, with children, and you kill their creativity, and you kill their kind of intrinsic motivation of taking on these impossible tasks, such as, kind of calculating the distance to the sun when you're only 7 or 8 years old, And so that's what I could see with my children happening, that they start to talk about, I have to read this because they told me so, not because I wanted to, I have to do this. And and then the worst, now I have free time. And I was like, free time? What's that? So there was this whole, kind of concept of have to do. And this is when I'm allowed to do what I want to do. And this is when I do what they tell me to do, but not because I want to do it. And I wanted them to think, you're going to school because you want to go to school. You want to learn. And this is a total different mindset. And it's actually now with my work, the work what I do, I know that is the worst you can do, because your intrinsic motivation is your most powerful learning machine. So if you can tap into this intrinsic motivation, if you can create an environment, a context where people feel intrinsically motivated to take on tasks and, for example, learn very difficult things, they can master. They can do, we learn at our full potential, but the opposite is also true,
Yeah.
So
that's wonderful.
That's what happened to our children.
I identify with what you're saying a lot there. Learning as an obligation versus the way you put it there was versus having a lust for life and learning and keeping that fire alive that's inside of all of us. That the world will in some ways try to switch off through sort of putting you in a box, etc.
Yeah, I always say, to parents, when we discuss, of course, I speak a lot with, all around the world with all these different schools we create. And then you meet parents and heads of schools and organizations and people that are a bit worried to say, but what will the parents not say? And so on and so forth. And I'm like, okay, but how would you like your child, to come out of school? Usually children that come out of, especially secondary school, they celebrate very intensely that they never, ever, ever have to go to school again, Or do you want your child to come out of school and think, wow, this was the most amazing period of my life. I want to continue going to school, And that's of course, it's the latter, because children today, they're going to have to learn so many other things. Basically, most of what you learn at school, the chances that you're going to need it one-to-one are extra rather small, You need to have this attitude for learning. You need to learn how to learn. You need to have the skills to embrace new knowledge. And
my personal favorite on that, Rosan, from my own high school experience was I remember memorizing the color of the flame color of potassium. And I'm still waiting in my life. I've been out of school for a long time now. I've still never used this one fact that I know around what color potassium burns as. So absolutely, it is about learning how to learn. That's wonderful context. I think let's move on then to your area of expertise within designing learning spaces. So I'm interested that lust for life and lust for learning. What role does the design of the learning space play in that?
Well, first, I would like to say something a little bit about, design or architecture or the physical environment. I mean, because the physical environment has a much bigger impact actually on us than we often recognize. It impacts how we act and interact with each other. It impacts also our emotional, feelings. You come into a space and you like to be there, or you feel attracted to be there, or you feel more, invited to, for example, meet or exchange with other people, or the opposite can be a space that kind of invites you to be more focused and more concentrated and more go inside of yourself, etc. So spaces, they talk to you and they create behavior. Yeah. So there is a psychology part of it. There is a behavioral part of it. So basically what happens with education is, I don't want to say that, sometimes people think, okay, I go into this space and then become extremely creative. To be honest, I think that's bullshit. It doesn't work that way. What works that way is that you can, education has to change. Education is often, we're talking about large groups of people into a certain constellation or organization. Now, in order to make a whole organization change, it can be many people, it can be 2,500 students, so together with the teachers, we're quickly up for, 3,300 people that have to change their way of doing. Yeah? And now there are two things. One, the existing system actually hinders them in this change. There we can talk about that a little bit more, because innovation is so hard in education for a reason, Now, the other side is that if you create a physical framework that invites them to interact more with each other or in a different way, that sort of nudges them into a different, attitude or feeling when they come into the door and when they, work together. You're actually communicating, or you're actually creating a transformation with the mindset of the people, but also with the actions of the people and their interactions. So you're kind of pushing, it's like what we call here in Denmark a snowball effect. Depends on where in the world you are. And right now we're in the summer, but in the winter we can have snow.
We don't have much snow, but we know the snowball effect.
Yeah, so it's a snowball effect. It's something that becomes bigger and bigger and develops itself, And this is a little bit the opposite. That often what people are they're trying to sort of on Monday morning, send out a circular and send everybody on a weekly a course for a week. And they say, okay, now we're going to behave and do everything totally different. And it doesn't work that way, And that is the other part, the beauty of the physical environment of my job, is that if you create a physical framework that kind of changes your behavior, you see often that people start to see and to think differently after a short period of time. And this is, there's some very interesting books about that talk about that's called mind in motion. Means that if you're changing your physical patterns of movement, you're actually changing as well your patterns of thought. And they happen after a while, So what we see in the schools or what we work with, we see that they change behavior. And then after a while, they can also see new options and new opportunities, etc. And in that sense, yes, it makes you more creative because it kind of changes your way of, one can say, thinking. And then you see new opportunities that you couldn't see before. In a way, education is often very frozen in its mindset and in its way of working, because the buildings of education are very rigid.
Understood. I loved what you said there about spaces shape behavior, as well as our thinking. So I'm keen to follow you right down that path. So you also said innovation is hard, and that conventionally education is in these rigid old buildings. I'd love for you to continue and expand on that, the status quo, and in your view, what needs to change.
Well, I think that obviously, I think that there's no doubt about that education has to change. It's quite easy. It's one of the sectors that, in that sense, also interesting, from your perspective when you talk about investments in your postcard. But it's a sector that has needed to change for a very long time and has not changed very much. Is very slow in its embracing innovation on certain parts. Yeah. So one of the hard parts is, in a way, is not necessarily finding what is actually how can we get it moving. Yeah. So how can we create, in a way, at all a process of innovation? Because innovation is your iteration, means trying things out, discovering what works, what doesn't work, and then changing it on the go. Yeah. Now that's everything that a school doesn't do. It doesn't have this kind of iteration on the go. Yeah.
No one wants to feel that their children are being experimented on. It makes it very challenging.
Exactly. And the children don't want to be being experimented on, but also the teachers. You have to realize that teachers work in a very solitary kind of context. They're in a classroom. They're kind of there alone, I mean, they meet outside of the classroom, but when they're with the children and they're having an educational practice, they get very much, I would say, the natural inspiration you would get when you're on a work floor. You see each other, you work together, you are a lot of different contexts, so you have a continuous learning. Education is often, for teachers, can be very difficult because they're in a very, a teacher once told me, he said, well, Rosan, I buy into what you're telling me, but I'm the king of my my castle, and now you're asking me to share my castle with all the other kings, and it's a bit scary, That's basically a little bit what happens. So, no, but what I'm trying to talk about is that innovation requests a flexible mindset. Now, our children in the future actually also need a flexible mindset. That's one of our human qualities that's one of the amazing things of us as human beings. We are extremely flexible. We can be extremely flexible, let me put it this way. And we can also be extremely creative and iterative. Now, this is not only something that has to happen with education, it's also something you want to happen with your children. Because if they have to embrace a very uncertain future, there are all these voices that say that 65% of children in primary school will have a job that doesn't exist, and all these kind of stories, If we want our children actually to be prepared to the changes of the exponential changes our society, are evoking right now, they need a flexible mindset. They need to know how to learn. But they also need especially to have the creativity to, and the flexibility to figure it out in a way. Now, this flexibility is not part of an educational system, and it's not part of the physical environment. So basically what we do is we combine these. We create we create a layout that just offers more options. Now, you can use them, you can also not use them. But if you start using them, you start to see different perspectives. So it's kind of it's not rocket science. It's basically opening, suddenly seeing it from a different perspective and then think, oh, that could be interesting. And why don't we do it together? Let me work together with the science teacher. And then we do this project combining our arts and sciences. And then we do this amazing thing. And you know what? Etc. And then the kids, they also start. So you start basically creating options and different possibilities instead of keeping the door closed and making it very singular.
Okay, understood. Look, I'd love to then make this a bit tangible because we're in one of those situations where someone who's really good and deep at something makes it sound very easy. So everything you're saying sounds very easy, but we know it's not in practice. So I'd love to hear in a tangible example any of the schools or universities you've worked in. Just talk us through what was the problem, what was the design outcome, and what ultimately happened.
Well, I have to say that, right now, we're working in more than 30 countries with schools all around the world. And obviously, if you work in all these different countries and cultures, there are also substantial differences. Also, some of the schools, they are very premium and others are not, So obviously, there are some contextual things that really make stories different. So I think I should try a little bit different perspectives if we are going that road in our conversation here. But For example, I can, so some of them are IB schools, they're private schools, some of them are public schools, so there are very different circumstances in each of the schools. And I do think that is quite important to take into account, For example, let me just, for example, we worked with a school called Western Academy Beijing. This is in China, just for, and it's Western, so that says it also a little bit. So, and it's an IB school, and this is a school which is, they're really, they're embracing development. This is a school that is actually innovative and embracing innovative practices. And therefore, many years ago, they asked me just before Corona, we were working with them, and they asked us, okay, can you think of a way? We have all these ideas about our pedagogy and how we want to change. They called them something, Flow 21, they called it, yeah. Okay. Flow 21. And can you help us to think of how should this be reflected in the physical environment in such a way so we can combine, the way we want to work, with the physical environment, because right now we actually experience that the spaces don't really allow us to do some of these things. A lot of the things that want to talk about more innovative practices are often about, for example, project-based learning, that students do projects where they combine different subjects, where students have a different way of timetabling. One of the big issues of schools are like clockworks, they have this like 50 minutes, 50 minutes of German, 50 minutes of mathematics, etc. But our human mind doesn't, you're laughing now, but our human mind doesn't work that way. We don't have 50 minutes. I mean, this is a very ancient, wrong way of thinking about how a human person, or how we actually learn. So anyway, so they're going into that way, but then they notice that a traditional classroom system, only takes us so far and then it stops, So we were looking at that, and then together with them, we created a system of differentiated spaces that would allow them two things. One, for the teachers to work more conscious with the development of learning with their students, and for the students as well to recognize, in a way, how they learn. It was very much based at the time with them on the theory of knowledge, where we said, okay, it's something from the IB system. The theory of knowledge, talks about areas of knowledge like mathematics or languages or human sciences, and talks about the ways we access knowledge. For example, your imagination, your intuition, your etc. And then we said, okay, what if we have some spaces that allow you to actually train these consciously, and then all the way from KG to elementary school, they call it elementary school, middle school, high school, in such a way that you become conscious about how you use your imagination or your intuition or your languages or etc. in relation to different areas of knowledge in different contexts. So that was one part of it. So it's also about creating an awareness about how you learn. Now, the other part is also that the teachers then can use that to not only for themselves, because you're also, that is the difference and that's why architecture or design is so powerful in this context. The teachers also learn. So it's not only about the students that have to learn in a different way. No, the teachers have to learn in a different way as well. And they learn together. And this is the hard part, because schools in a way are, they have to change horses while they're riding them, or to use a metaphor. So, and then that is actually a difficult part of innovation in education, that the teachers we should talk about it separately. I know it's something you probably want to talk about. I mean, what about the teachers? Because obviously, they're very important in an educational context. And so this is a little bit what happened. So we did to create these different spaces. Then the other part of the school there is that what happens with them is very typical. There is a big school, a big campus, and it's in function. So you cannot start changing all the spaces of a school which is running for several reasons, economy, but can also be because there are people in them and they need to use the facilities, and you can't just start building. This is Beijing, so, very hard to get a building permit for anything, etc. So not only do you have to do your design work and talk with the school about how they have to change their pedagogy and how you can create spaces that help them in this whole conversation. We work very holistic in this development. We also then have to think, how do we do this from a pragmatic point of view? And then you start planning. And this is the next level of our work. You start thinking, okay, let's do, to do this part in KG, just one part in elementary, this part in the middle school, and this part in the high school in such a way that all the surrounding spaces and functions can benefit from the areas you tackle that become then more innovative. And that kind of kickstarts this different, I would say, mindset or flexible way of working and has the biggest potential. So you also have to gradually start working with these physical changes. Now, so that is an example. There was the Western Academy of Beijing. We did some change with them, worked very, very efficiently. And I know that they will continue changing because it's not about creating a solution. It's about actually creating a movement more or a transformation process than it's about coming up with a solution.
That's wonderful, Rosan. I think two of the big themes that stood out for me as you were talking there. The first is that everything you do in design is contextual. So it would be different working for an IB school in Beijing than it is for a public school in Argentina, as an example.
Totally.
So that point on context really matters. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. And related to that point on being contextual is some of the stakeholders that are impacted as well. So in particular, the marrying in this case of what the school was trying to doing in pedagogy to then the learning space and how they amend the learning space for that pedagogy. So I think, lots of themes. Those are two of them that really stood out for me as you were talking there. Given that you've spoken about Western Academy Beijing, do you want to take one which is different, either a university or a public school? Because as you said, you've worked across 30 countries. And lots of them.
I would prefer both, but I mean, I have a problem with this because it's like talking about your children, I mean, I have many children.
Who's your favorite child?
I don't have a favorite, I think that certain things are important in my work, but I mean, you're very right, it's contextual. So, I mean, basically, if I can say something about the methodology, because we have, I mean, over the years, we have developed a very clear methodology how to work with this. So the outcomes are different. Are individual, but the methodology, how to approach it, is actually not, there is a clear, a structure behind.
That's great. Let's go there. Let's talk through it.
Well, one thing at a time. You want to know many things. So one of the things I think that is very important about the methodology, and for you to understand, or what I would like to explain is that it's a combination of, it's not just about architecture. People see the design. The design is very tangible. So this is what you react on. You have seen images of our work. You go like, wow, and this really definitely doesn't look like a school, and et cetera, et cetera. But the behind, the work behind the scenes is a combination of organization, management structure. Like I said, schools are like clockworks, Not only about time, it's also about people. It's about, one teacher, 30 kids in one particular room doing this particular thing. And then, for example, government is managing, that's the math teacher. And, he's got that many hours on this school and that many hours on that school. And this is a student. And I sign off that this student's had that many hours of math a week, So there's this system behind. Then there's the other part, which is the pedagogy. There's the methodologies you use, where we're going right now. There's a huge change of pedagogy. I mean, with the coming of AI, even more, I mean, the teacher becomes more and more a coach, a person that guides you, that helps you. I mean, there's a clear change of paradigm there. And all these topics, we can have many lengthy conversations about it. That's why I write books about it and I give lots of lectures. So we won't be able to cover it all. So I try to be a little short. And then first, after these two, so this the holistic work, we go into the design. But the design is also many things. So in each of these topics, the design is, the furniture, is the building, the space layout, the synergy in between spaces, the connection in between the inside and the outside, and, the context in a, urban context, etc. So design can be the movement patterns of the people that create a different mindset, from etc. So in each of these topics, there's a lot to talk about. So we won't be able to cover them all, but we have developed a holistic methodology, over the years that we work with schools where we actually work and touch upon these three major topics at the same time. And you have to do that because if not, your solution won't work, and this is a little bit, so when you look at the images or some of the schools we have done and you're like, wow, it's because, you can see a different, kind of system in a way. It's rolled out. It works in a different way. The timing, the scheduling, the organization of the people is different. You see different pedagogical methodologies being practiced there, and you see a design that allows and equips it for that, at the same time. So a different story I thought might be a bit interesting. I would just like to touch upon I would actually like to touch upon a public school, because I do think people always think this is only for the very happy few, and it's not. And I would like to touch upon university, because that's also another, I would say, kind of a criticism we deal with, that people feel like, this is for little kids, this innovation, and, but once you grow up and you go to university, it's serious. So talking about, we did this at the University of Liberty, they call themselves La Universidad de la Libertad in Mexico City, and it's a university which is developed. I mean, they have a collaboration with other universities, amongst others Minerva from the US. But the thing about this university, there are two aspects which I think are very interesting to share. The first one is the fact that they work with what they call a digital model. So you have the digital realm, you have the physical realm, and then where these things come together. And then we developed very early in the process with them a matrix that covered, and this is like a matrix covering two things. So we talked about the physical, the digital, and the digital. Also talking about what are the qualities, why would we actually come together physically, and what qualities do you want to have out of these interactions when we, rub minds and get together, and what are the qualities of human interaction when you actually physically turn up, because a lot of universities have, a lot of their functions are out of this context. They're in a more, happening in a digital way, and you combine these and different models. And then we also talked about what we call fixed and flex and flux, we called it. We said refers to people, time, and to people, time, and in a way, what they were doing. And that referred to, for example, our fixed amounts of people or fixed kind of careers through your, running through your university, or maybe you are, doing it loose, you're just doing a course, or very loose, coming just for a day for some conference. We talked about it referred to the amounts of people that would frequent the university. Is it a huge group of people, they come one time, or is it a group of people that comes during 5 years, every day, or do they come every 3 months when they're following an online, etc.? And it also referred to the spaces and the space planning. So you had spaces which are fixed, that you can book, that have a door. You have spaces which are flexible, you can reserve with a little app, you can, also as a student. And then you have spaces which are flux, which you cannot reserve in a way, that are always there to kind of interact with. So we had this whole kind of matrix or model in a way to work with the spaces, the organization, the pedagogical, etc. And this is when things work best, So today, this university, and it's also gorgeous. Because obviously, if I would go there, let's say I'm somewhere, Mexico is a big country, and I'm maybe following something digitally. Once in a while, I attend certain things in my in this particular physical location. Why would I go there? There has to be something why I actually go there, and that's a total difference. Because for many ages, universities were just shaped as, in a way they were lazy. They were thinking, of course, our students come here, and then they sit on an uncomfortable, shitty chair, in a room with another 200 people, and listening to somebody talking, and then suddenly, Corona happened, and I realized I can look at the same talk, and I can actually put it on speed 3 times, so I'm even faster through my talk, and it's as good as what you get when you're sitting in this lecture hall, So what do I actually bring to the table as a university? Why would I actually go there? And this is, and then trying to get the best of these two worlds. So this is where it really focuses on these things, and then it takes advantage of when we actually meet physically. And that is interesting from a university perspective. I think really changes the whole idea of why would I actually go there? And if you go there, what value does it give to me?
Absolutely, that's very interesting. It's definitely the first time in my life I've ever heard the term digital as well, the mix between physical and digital. So that's one that I'll remember going forward. But I won't stop you. Let me let you carry on, because you said you also wanted to do one public school. So I'll come back to some of the themes. But
yes.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Well, and with the public schools, you mentioned Argentina, where we worked. Well, as you know, Latin America can be a rough kind of ride when it comes to politics, or rather unstable sometimes. So there's several governments ago. Several governments ago, it was when Macri was there. And I mean, I don't want to say anything political about Argentina. I just want to say that's when we were active there at the time. And we worked with their Ministry of Education. Happily, actually, the Secretary of Education at that time, right now, is the Minister of Education of the city of Buenos Aires, or she's very active there and she's doing some amazing work. But what we did at the time was basically, instead of us doing the work, we were we basically educated different teams from all over the country that were a combination of actually schools, people from the local. They have they have like provinces, and each province has its own little government, and its own little Ministry of Education. Yep. So we were having these teams of schools and people from the local ministries of education and the local architects and designers all coming in. And then we were training them in this specific methodology so they could actually, innovate themselves, and actually embedding this innovation in the country on the secondary schools. Now, another example from public schools. So there is a difference in us doing it, till the little detailing in the hand, or actually, kind of teaching other people. Another example is from Belgium in Europe, which is a bit more, in a different way, where we worked with a lot of actually also public schools. And there it went first, they started in the Flemish part. We have done, for example, a school called, which is also nominated now for one prize of being, world's best designs, called it's in Zandbergen, or another one is in a place called Zottegem. I mean, both public schools had to be realized under the budget constraints of a traditional, public school in Belgium, which is, it's not huge, What happened there is that we were able to take part of our methodology, which talks about how you learn, not what you learn, but how you learn, and which kinds of breaks it down. It's almost like an algorithm of different learning situations and different spatial context. And this system, I wrote some books about it, and this system, this algorithm of spaces and learning situations, they wrote it into their brief for the licitation, one can say, for, the competitions, the architectural competitions of design and build of their schools. And then we had a little bit of a proactive, construction company in Belgium that contacted us and said, well, your theory is all over these papers and your images of your work. So we thought, if you want to work with us, we're making a very good competition here. And I said, well, depends on the conditions, And then we were able to actually make a very good agreement with them, because one of the problems with all this kind of public schools, when in Europe, for example, is that when they get built, there's no dialogue in between the designers, the school, and the construction. So you basically get a brief and then you just have to execute it. So there's no possibility of innovation using the physical framework and the discussions in the process, which is part of our methodology. So I said to them, well, only if you make sure that is part, you have to calculate it into your pricing, because we were going to have to need to do this dialogue with the schools. And they did. So we did. And these schools today, they look beautiful, but obviously with the budgetary framework that we had, and they function fantastically. And they're some of the schools that they track the results. They're the absolute top, and we had this so it's very nice to see that people actually move towards these schools. They're in villages. People move. Their prime minister, they move to this one village that is not the current one. They move to one village because they want to have these kids in this school, and it's a public school. So that's really nice, So you see that they have great results. They have done so in a context that others do more traditional schools, So
that's wonderful, Rosan. The diversity that you've captured in the examples that you've spoken about, China, Mexico, Argentina, Belgium, public, private, blended learning, the digital mixing the physical and the digital. It's such a wonderful variety. So I think we've gotten to see a great, even that is still a small subset of all the wide work you do. But I think we've gotten to see a great overview of that. And what brings it all together, which you mentioned, is that common approach, that organization, pedagogy, and design. And I think that came through really, really strongly and really well. One thing you've mentioned a couple of times in this conversation, so I'm keen to follow you down there. You've mentioned the impact of technology. You've mentioned AI. So, for instance, you mentioned pre-COVID and post-COVID, the differences in people's willingness to learn digitally. And then you've mentioned AI and the changing nature of jobs. So if I just take that concept as a whole, technology and the movement of technology, how is it impacting the work that you do?
Well, I mean, there are two approaches. One is the work we do. I mean, like what my architects do, how they work. I mean, in my company.
Yes.
And the other aspect of it, which I think is more interesting for the conversation, is how it impacts, education and what we observe. Because obviously being in so many different countries globally all around the world, you also see different approaches to it. I mean, Germany is just waking up, they're having a bit of that's one story. But so you really notice a very different kind of approach to the way people relate to the challenges. I mean, sometimes I have a trick question, Monde. I ask people when when I'm at the schools and we talk about this, I just ask them and say, okay, think about when did your iPhone come into your life, and then think about, and then people sing and say, okay, and how did it change your life, and how fast did it go, etc. Okay, so we have that. Then says, okay, now I ask you another question. How do you think, how do you think society will be in 5 years? Under the influence of, the new technological developments? And how do you think it will look in 10 years? Yeah. Now, this is why I'm saying that is because education, and this is obviously why you, from an investment point, are very interested in education, because there is always a rather longer period of time. Most people like their kids to go to the same school, so they start when they're little and they continue for many years, I mean, so this 10-year period is not unrealistic, or 5-year period, So, well, where are we going to be in 2030, And then people, they start to stammer, and they can't really tell you, not really. And some have some like, ooh, and they go, come with some very wild ideas. And some say that they think not much will have changed, Now, I cannot say what exactly will change, but I do know that it will change. And this is a very important fact, because when we talk about how we deal as human beings with uncertainty, and this is a little bit going back to where we started, with the flexible mindset, being able to adapt to different situations. The effect that we have to adapt to different situations will accelerate extremely fast. So we don't have time, almost to adapt and to kind of train our flexibility. We cannot go to yoga, and laying out stretch, for 3 years before we have to be flexible now. Yeah. So what I see in schools is basically this. Yeah. I'm quoting from a conversation. I'm not going to say names, but I was in the school and they made an investigation. This is maybe, 3 weeks ago. It's somewhere in Asia. Big school we work with. Very premium. And they did an investigation on their secondary students. And they had, we had done these surveys, and how many times a day during school hours they interacted with an AI, although they were not really supposed to do, actually. Yeah. And the average answer, of a 15-year-old was 38 times a day during school hours when they're not supposed to. Yes.
Wow.
So this was a bit interesting. Yeah. So he said, okay. I mean, and the teachers, they were shocked, they were shocked, and I was just trying to tell them in this way, I said, like, wake up, wake up. You cannot stop this, I mean, you have to, and this is what I mean with flexible mindset, you have to go with the flow, you have to adapt. So we have to start thinking, okay, great, So next step, what will, what is, like some people say, I mean, it's not about being more efficient. I'm sure AI will be used by many, many people about being more efficient. I mean, we probably do. But the interesting part is when you can actually become, when you can enhance your own potential as a human being. So the question is, how can you as a teacher, enhance the learning potential of your students using AI? and most teachers have no answer to that, but you have to. This is the obligation you have as a school, as an educational institution, because these are the children, they are the future. This is the obligation you have, and I feel that we run away from our responsibility. When you're saying that your kid, you're basically educating. We're still having educational systems with tests and assessment and subject-based learning and drilling them for the exams. By drilling a child for an exam, it's not only just a necessary evil, you're also changing their mindset. And this is you're actually also limiting them. You're not only just kind of doing it because everybody does it and it hasn't changed yet. No, you're actually taking away you're actually damaging them, in the development of a creative and flexible mindset that they will need to embrace the future. And the people that actually are successful, and are doing very well are the people that do so despite their school education. They're not the ones that do so. The ones that had the most, I also have been listening to some of your podcasts in introduction to our talk today. And it was very interesting, the latest one you released, it was very interesting that it's obviously a person that had things in their life, that made them actually flexible for, it's not thanks to school, despite
it's that fire you spoke about at the beginning, the lust for life and the lust for learning. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So what do I see with AI? I think that certain things that are maybe, the enhancement of our human potential. I always say, when people say, what is it you do? I don't say I'm an architect. I say we create environments, contextual, I should say, we create environments that enhance the human potential to develop and learn. So this is the focus of what my company, my organization does. So therefore it embraces a lot of things, it's not, the physical context is a part of it, So obviously we're really looking into this. And another part of it is that, how can we enhance our human potential? And if you ask that question with everything you do, because that's what we do. When we go into a project, we say, okay, how do, we put on the table, how do you actually learn? How do we learn and how can we enhance our learning potential? And if you just stick to that question, to that focus, instead of saying we have to do a school for 800 people, therefore we have to have so many classrooms, we have to have a gym and a canteen. Well, if we just take away this have to, no. What are we doing here? We have a school. Why is the school there? To make the children learn and to create the best possible, kind of well-educated adults when they get out. Okay, how are we going to create the best learning for these children, And then the answers you start getting are very different, And the solutions you get out of that are also very different. But you have to keep an open mindset. You have to say, okay, what is the most important? So if I can conclude something, I think that and this is a bit interesting because it bikes back to the beginning of our conversation. Namely, you asked me, where do you come from? What is your background? Because I have a background in contemporary art, Yes. And it's a bit interesting. And I sometimes wonder, okay, well, how does this impact, apart from a design or, color, material kind of, what does it really change in the approach and, who made me who I am and work how I do? It's because we always put the question before. And it sounds a bit stupid if I say it. You put the question before the answer, obviously. Actually, we don't even answer it necessarily. We consider the question the most important driver. And I think that if you do that, all your conclusions, if you say, no, how do you learn? And then all the conclusions and what you do and the decisions you take, they are different, because you're actually developing things instead of giving ready-made answers. So that is a little bit, I think, coming from a contemporary art attitude, I think, or a way of, that comes from.
Yeah. That's a wonderful, wonderful way to tie it all together, because you've taken us right back to the beginning, right back to that fire that we spoke about right at the beginning of this, and how do we keep that fire going, that lust for life, that lust for learning, and it's you've given us a lovely journey through design. Now, I have one more question before I come back to you to ask my concluding question. So this question is just before we move to the concluding question, because you've got such broad array in your life. You've written multiple books. You've been an author. We haven't spoken about that at all. You've worked in so many different countries and the elements of your design, etc. Is there anything that I haven't asked about that you would like to just briefly touch on?
Maybe I would like to actually then, pose a question to keep it a little bit into the
fun.
type of conversation we are in, It's a little bit like if you think about, and I'm going to ask you a question, Monde, as a question too. It's like if you think about, okay, what really motivates you? Yeah. And if you think about like a learning situation that you really recall during your life, anytime. I mean, what is really like a strong, powerful moment of learning you recall, and what made it actually a powerful learning moment?
Okay, so there were two questions in there. So there was what motivates you, and then this powerful learning moment. So there's the motivation is on multiple layers. There's a big picture, and then there's a small picture motivation. It's not sort of a simple answer. So let me go. Just if I go big picture, the single probably biggest thing in my life as a motivation, why I decide to dedicate a lot of my energy towards education, is that I believe it's at the center of so much of human flourishing, both at an individual level and at a family level across generations. We could talk about where that comes from, but I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to. But that's the fundamental belief, and that's why I dedicate a lot of my time and energy to working in education. Then there's the sort of intrinsic motivators and the things that I enjoy. So I'll give some of them as examples. So variety, for instance. Variety is really important to me. I'm a curious person. I like to work on a lot of different things. I'd die having sort of a single, being put in a box and you go work at Astron Mobile or whatever it is for the rest of your life. So that's one intrinsic motivator for me. The second is I like intellectual challenges. So intellectually very curious. I like things, trying to figure things out. And maybe let me just touch on one last one. And it's part of why I actually have these conversations. One of the ways that I really enjoy learning and what I try to do through my work is learning through others. And that's, that's how we work. I work in teams in pretty much everything that I do, including this very podcast that we're on right now. So there's several others, but those are three of the intrinsic motivators and one of the big motivators, macro motivators in my life.
It's really interesting what you're saying, because you're touching exactly on, some of the topics. If you look at the science of learning, the first one, what enhances your learning is diversity. You call it variation, So what we do, for example, when we design spaces, we create diversity in spaces so you can choose where to learn, when you learn, and the different combinations. We know that, increases the learning. Then you say challenges is your motivation. We know that, human beings, if you want to develop, you all the time have to have a challenge, not a challenge which you can't master, one that really, gives you this moment of uncertainty, but then you can, this is what actually drives learning. And then the last one, as you're interested, so that's is learning in interaction. The best way we human beings learn, the fastest we learn is when we learn in interaction with others, So this is really interesting that just by asking this one question, and you actually answered the things that I had to add to the conversation. And then the last one I want to say is is very nice. And then the last one I want to say, Monde, is that, the first little book I wrote on purpose was very little, because I thought that I could really make it sure that people would have it in their pocket and take it with them, which is the first step of this methodology I developed. Was called Designing for a Better World Starts at School, because as you said, there's this thing with education. It's the baker mate. It's the DNA of the society we construct for tomorrow. But there's also something embedded in this, and this is why I think also, I'm talking maybe to some of your listeners when you talk about investments, I really think that investment in education is not just about investment, it's also about creating a better society, and I think that is actually, we need people with a little bit of idealistic, perspective on the world. And there's something very interesting that when you dive into, like we did today in our conversation about, how obviously I'm a person that is very clear in what I think is the right way to go. But, education has in a way, the way we teach our children reflects as well how we see ourselves. I always think that is a bit interesting, when you look as a parent, when you talk to parents and you look at your children, and maybe that happened with me and my child, it's like, hey, and it doesn't talk only about what happens to your children. It also talks about how we see ourselves as human beings and what we think we are capable of, So in that sense, don't stop hoping. We didn't even get into your learning moments.
The second question, I did say,
substantial learning moment.
Exactly.
That's the next one.
Should we go there, Rosan?
I don't know. I mean, I have all the time in the world. You tell me.
Let me answer your question, and then we'll come back to the concluding question. So the second part of that was a memorable learning experience. So it's stuck in my mind for a long time. This was in a tertiary education setting, university setting. We did an exercise as a class as a whole, where basically you're given a set of chips, each of you, not the edible type, like think of like casino chips as an example. And you've got to trade, and there's a bunch of rules, and you got to trade these chips, and you go across multiple rounds. And as the rounds progress, so some people will have high value chips, some people will end up with lower value chips, and then you end up in a system where you've then got to wear so that like the low value chips become a square, and you got to put a sort of square on your head, and the high value chips become a triangle, and whatever the case, and you've got to negotiate across these groups and etc. And then you have a debrief at the end. And in total, this was probably about a 3-hour exercise would be my estimate. And I've ended up doing it twice. Once at Stanford, so in a university setting, and then another time in something called the Tutu Fellowship, Archbishop Tutu Fellowship. And geez, I mean, I could have stories here for a very long time on the things that happen in that game. It's a rigged game, basically. So depending on what chips you start with, and you don't know what chips other people start with, you basically have no chance of really moving from your group. But the dynamics that develop across these varying groups, and this is something that's created artificially within a 3-hour period. But you end up with, the squares don't want to talk to the triangles, and then, they'll switch people in a group, and then a person gets rejected from the triangle group because, you're not one of us. Like you don't come from the struggle of being a square or whatever the case. It was phenomenal, and it's a rigged game. The entire thing is about social dynamics, and the role that a lot of these, some of them artificial, some of them natural constructs play in the way that we interact with each other. So it's one that has stuck with me, for a very, very long time and informed a lot of my thinking. That's my most memorable learning experience.
It's beautiful. It's actually a beautiful story as well. And, without knowing it, Monde, now you tapped into the other book I wrote, which is called Play to Learn, designing for uncertainty. Because if you start to look at how we play, our playing as children, the way we play as children is our superpower, it's our natural born capacity to learn and develop, And if you start analyzing this, and I did actually some very interesting work with that at Project Zero at Harvard, they start analyzing, how do we actually play, And there's a pedagogy in it, there's a steps, there's certain kind of stages, and then when you start looking at these, you can actually use them consciously when you start working with learning and designing learning processes. And there's also another thing we used at a certain moment about play, looking at the concept of play. And then you have different ways that children play games. And one is they play with objects, they play with role play, where you train your empathy and place yourself in other situations. And there's one is called, games, and games is where you try out different social constructs and stuff like that. And that is what you did exactly there, amongst others, And then when you start thinking, and then there's my last little message, which I would like to add to our conversation here, which I think is really important, And I think that I mentioned it very briefly during our conversation when I said it's also about developing an awareness on how you learn, or consciousness maybe. And I think that this is the thing, we always learn. But you can learn more or less depending on how you in a way you focus, or how you work with the things that happen to you, And this is, you can learn from something or not, And in a way, you had this experience and you took so much learning from this 3-hour experience, yeah? Just imagine that all your education would have been so intense, just think where you would have been today, But what I'm trying to say is that if we are aware of, the learning in different situations, not only because we go to school and now I'm at school and I'm learning, and then I go home and have free time and I don't learn, I'm just doing it for some kind, but you might be as well learning I don't know, all kind of things, because then you're playing as a kid, and you're learning different social, you're actually developing your social intelligence, super important. Now, talking about the future development impact of AI, I mean, what kind of, capacities as human beings are going to be more important, etc. So there's all these little interactions, and you're learning actually constantly, and you can create a context or an environment that enhances this learning in many different ways, So in that sense, I really think sometimes that schools have to reconsider a little bit, not only how we learn. I mean, this is this is the basics, that should be the first one that I'm a school, what am I selling? I'm selling learning. Okay, how do I actually do that best way? But that's a basic. Next to it, there should also be, of course, the whole, kind of thinking, okay, what should schools contribute to what you actually learn in other situations of life, And I'm saying this, for example, because we see so many also negative feedback, for example, that children have a hard time, because of interaction in social media, and they're suffering, and there are certain things that don't develop their fine motorics. Like young kids, we can see a decline in development of fine motorics. And because of that, we know that there's a cognitive impact on their brain development. But then what do you do as a school? You just go complain? No, you start thinking, how can I develop their fine motorics? So because before they were always writing by hand and now they're not. No, okay, so how do I catch that instead of, and that is the change of mindset that educational institutions need to have, and because if we start working together, we can actually do so much better, So and basically that's my attitude to education. But it was lovely that just by asking you 2 questions, Bonne, you just tapped into exactly the things I still needed to say.
Thanks, Rosan. That's a lovely way to cap it off because I've learned a lot through this conversation, and I really appreciate it. So I asked the same concluding question to all of our guests, and that is simply, please tell us about one of your favorite teachers or educators.
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that, and I was thinking about what I'm going to answer, because I find it very hard because either there are none or there are many, so that was a bit of a hard time. I think I have had many different teachers that meant a lot for me during my life on different stages, and sometimes also people that I just met once, that made a huge impact, and I learned a lot. And this is about this awareness maybe, or consciousness of learning, and then maybe more in a conscious. But if I had to choose one, I chose one from when I went to art school, because I really, I had a not very positive, time at school. But when I started at the art school, I actually really enjoyed myself. I had freedom. I could pursue my projects. They allowed me to travel. I went to Barcelona as well, and went there to school, and etc. There was, I could do two educations at the same time, so I didn't get bored, etc. So that was the good part. So basically, there was Guus Rekers, as a Dutch, sorry. was his name. And he was a teacher at the art school where I went to, which, by the way, was in Utrecht, not Amsterdam. Doesn't really matter that much. But and he actually came from drama, from theater, and he was teaching kind of a blending of philosophy and sociology and art history kind of topic. So it was actually theoretical, but he was just a brilliant thinker, and he taught me something extremely important. He called it placing a little bird on your shoulder, because he said when you're an artist, you have to be able to create art pieces, but you also have to be able to, in a way, see them as if you're a different person, and he trained that, so we trained to be able to do this, kind of out of person reflection and look back at what you're doing and being the person that create and then seeing it from the other side. And he went into and training that. And that has been extremely valuable for me because it allows me to always kind of see everything from multiple perspectives, not only from my own mind, but I know that people have different minds and different cultures. I travel so much, so it just has been invaluable for me as a person. So he unfortunately is not alive anymore. I know actually his son called me at a certain moment because he found my phone number in his little notebook. He didn't know who I was because we had stayed in contact after. and because he died, unfortunately. So here, a little, kind of thanks to Guus Rekers and what he meant for me.
That's a wonderful tribute, Rosan. I'm not going to try pronounce his name.
Sorry.
I'll leave it as that's a wonderful tribute to your teacher. And in the same way that he helped bring out your fire and that lust for learning, I hope that your work does that for many others that you touch through the work that you do with schools and universities. So thank you so much for your time today, and I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you very much.